Hey, hi, I am John Troyer. For folks that don't know me, I'm actually going to tweet while we're talking here. For folks that don't know me, I have started, this is a grammar lesson, I have started the VMUG, the UK, hashtag UK VMUG, otherwise they'll yell at me, hashtag UK VMUG keynote. Thank you very much. We're now officially tweeted. Hey, I'm John Troyer. I spent about 9 years at VMware in our community social media group there. I started way back in 2005. I was just going to be there for a few minutes, maybe a year. I thought, well, I'd come. It's this company. I don't know much about it. And immediately, I could tell that something was happening in 2005. In fact, one of the first blog posts that I read, somebody had written, I think they'd done a vMotion for the first time, and somebody had written, I have seen the face of God, and it is VMware. And I'm like, wow, this is much more spiritual journey than I thought it was going to be. But over those 9 years, in working with the community, and working with the VMware user groups, and working with the bloggers, and then starting the vExpert program, and growing that into where it is now, I worked with a lot of IT professionals. I've always been a technologist, never been an IT professional, but I've worked with lots of folks over the years. And it was really fascinating to see the journey of people who were regular, IT admins, smart, curious, with a learning stance, and watch their careers grow over that decade. And the people that I was kind of sneaking into VMworld back in 2006, 7, 8, became speakers in 7, 8, 9, started to win awards in 8, 9, and then finally are, CTOs of companies and things like that. So it's been a super interesting career journey. So I have seen many career paths, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about here today. It is going to echo some things that we heard this morning from Joe Bagley, but hopefully with a little bit of different take. In fact, I think without any connection, without any coordination, we both have some of the same slides, so that's kind of interesting too. So I am, my wife and I flew out from California, near San Francisco, so I am both a little bit jet lagged, and I'm on a copious amount of cold medicine. So, this should be a party. You guys have been sitting all day, you guys have been, sitting and learning, you're a little bit fried right now, I think, right? Everybody a little bit fried, so we're gonna try to keep it light. We're going to try to keep it moving. This is fun stuff, though. So let me just and I'm going to have people raise their hands and things like that, just to kind of keep the circulation moving. After this, you have to keep sitting, because after this is the prizes. So I got you. So nothing you can do. So anyway, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Now the trick is, and I learned this from VMware COO Carl Eschenbach, is you do it once and then you act kind of disappointed, and then you say it again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Much better. See, it works. There's those tricks. Okay, architecting. I picked a really crazy title. Architecting your IT career. I don't even know what that means. How many people in the room, but I did it for a reason. How many people in the room either have architect in their title or someday would like to have architect in their title? So a good portion of the room, right? It's a pretty cool title, right? I don't actually know what that means, because what does an architect do? I understand how you architect a house, but I don't understand, and I understand how you architect maybe a data center or a solution. But when you're talking about architecting a career, we have, when we start our careers, we have 50 years ahead of us, right? I just turned 50. I have 20 years ahead of me, and I've got to figure out how I'm going to live and work and love the work I do, right? So think about that for a second. That kind of, it's kind of fake profound, but it is profound, right? We've got to actually stay employed for decades. And so, if you think about architect, what do architects do? It's not necessarily about laying out a plan. It's not necessarily about laying out, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to spend 3 years at this, and then I'm going to be a senior technician, and then I'm going to be and then I'm going to be an architect, and then I'm going to be a CTO, and just draw that straight line. You can't even do that for 50 years inside living in a house, right? If you'd have built a house 50 years ago, by this time, right, all the furniture has changed, the carpet has changed, you've ripped off the wallpaper, you've probably replaced the wiring, you've taken the 2 taps and now you have 1 tap, right? That's a British specialty, I think, right? So you cannot predict the changes of actually living in something, let alone in a house for 50 years, let alone your own career. So let's just talk about an approach to doing it. IT is a really weird profession, right? Because on one hand, I mean, let's go down here to the bottom. Think about what's your job? You know, what's the role of IT versus the role of infrastructure? Is your job to keep the VMware running and storage running and networking running? Or is your job to help the business? And so part of having a healthy 50-year career in this industry is figuring out that there are roles where you're just going to help keep the storage running for 50 years. But more and more, if you want to advance in your career, if you want to actually add value to the business, if you don't want to be considered part of facilities, like the chairs, right, you need to actually think, what's the role of, is my role in IT keeping infrastructure? Or is my role in IT actually helping the business, and how can I do that? This, we talked about Simon Wardley this morning. This is a diagram from his blog, the Simon Wardley's blog. So this is the enterprise adoption cycle. You know, you can apply this actually to any technology. And by the time that we get around to it, it seems like it's too late. So I just put that in there because it's funny. But one of the points I'm going to keep making in this, in the next half an hour is just that we have to be a learning organization. We have to be continuously adopting new methodologies, learning new skills, and adding new value. There's an interesting transition going on right now in the Windows world. Windows admins, previous, former, current, most of the room, right? Most of your Windows training was in the GUI. A lot of it, right? Click, 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 wizards, got it all set up, boom. That was what Windows brought to the world, you know, over the past couple decades. There's a really funny thread if you go over to Spiceworks, which is a forum, an IT forum, and there's a really funny thread there about PowerShell. It's gone on something like 15, 20, 30 screenfuls, right, at this point, right? It's a thread that won't die, one of those threads that won't die. And it consists mostly of Windows admins complaining about PowerShell and NanoServer because their world is changing, right? And Windows is really pushing, Microsoft is really pushing out the importance of PowerShell versus GUIs and the importance of, the increasing importance of a small VM like a NanoServer. To a VMware crowd, doesn't sound so threatening. But if your whole world was around GUIs, that's a huge change in your job role and your skill set. And most of the people are sitting there complaining. I actually talked to Jeffrey Snover of Microsoft. He invented PowerShell. He actually was demoted for making PowerShell. Seriously, they're like, our command line, right, it's not up to snuff, right? It hasn't been up to snuff for years. We've got to do something about it. He's like, well, let's make this thing. I've got this idea. We've got this idea for this thing called PowerShell. And the powers that be at Microsoft said, Jeffrey, that's stupid. Like, why would anybody want to do that? We are about GUIs, and we are about power, and we are about automation. And he's like, no, to do this, we're going to have to do PowerShell. And they're like, fine, but you're going to have to go work in that group, and you're going to have to take a demotion. And he said, okay. Now, of course, 5 years later, they came back to him and said, so Jeffrey, about that, what's a good, that basement we put you in. We want to talk to you about that. And actually now he's a Microsoft Fellow, the highest ranking of technical contributor at Microsoft. And PowerShell is the center of their go-forward strategy. So, I don't know, it's just a metaphor about change, I guess. In 2005, a book came out, Visible Ops Handbook. Actually still really interesting. I actually recommend you picking it up. It's kind of a short book. But they looked at high-performing IT managers, and they found out that they came from an interesting set of background. Non-commissioned officers in the military, chemical engineers, and auditors. Because what they all have in common, they are very comfortable with implementers of process, right? This is a process-oriented thing. So in 2005, high process training was an indication of performance in IT. I think that's still the case, but I think as we talked about this morning, this is one of the same slides we have. I was going to pull this in too. We're looking at different roles in the organization, and you have to decide for yourself what role you're going to play. I think sometimes we make fun of the town planners, especially if you're in ITIL, right? ITIL? Oh, I'm so sorry. But the fact of the matter is, you still need the town planners to run. And if you're the kind of person whose red stapler is right there and whose pencils are all in a row, and you like process and you're good at it, please stay and do it well, right? Be Six Sigma, be ITIL, run that part of the business. Because this part of the business, the agile part of the business, if you weren't here this morning, this is basically talking about a technology adoption curve for almost anything, and you can map it into almost anything. There are pioneers who start, and they are very agile, they are very lawless, they are very just do it cowboy by definition. Settlers who then take the things that the cowboys make and then start to create process around them. Simon compares them to the people doing DevOps right now. They're taking these artifacts that are very, that are just, they're made without structure, they're kind of made on the fly, they're made very quickly, and they're putting a process around them. And then the town planners who actually run a process and run tickets and run the, make sure that the trains run on time, make sure that we have electricity and water and things like that, which are good things, right? So there's nothing wrong with being a town planner. But you should, as you're thinking about your career, kind of think about the place that you fall into and your own personal kind of predilections for what you want to do. I'm going to talk about expertise. And so how are we getting to where we're going? What kind of an expert are you, and how are your skill sets evolving? So these are some slides, and I didn't put the label on them. These are some slides from a guy called Ivan Pepelnyak. He's ipspace.net. He's in the networking space. I don't know, does anybody know Ivan? Ivan's an amazing guy if you're in the networking space. He's very funny. And it's around a thing called a T-shaped expert. Have anybody heard T-shaped expert? Yes, no, a couple people. So I like T-shaped expert as far as it goes, but let's take it a little farther. So basically the idea is, okay, on the x-axis we have knowledge areas, we have level of expertise. A generalist has a great many knowledge areas at a very small amount. An expert has a lot of expertise in one area. Okay, right? So we all get that. So that's what the two kinds of, if you're an expert versus a generalist. Well, here's the problem. So your typical generalist job takes the green area here, right? And it is, it requires skills, files, maybe, NFS and backups and a couple of other things like that. And that's your generalist job. Maybe you even have to fix the printers or whatever. Sorry about that too. But an expert job then is in a typical area. The problem is if you're the world's expert on VRA, and I was just talking to one of the world's experts on VRA before the break here, most of the jobs you go to are not going to require the world's expert on VRA. Most of those jobs are going to require some expertise, some familiarity, but they're not going to require you to be the world's expert. So Reinhardt, my friend, has developed a huge expertise in VRA, but most of the gigs he gets are not going to value that huge expertise. They're going to like hiring him because he has credentials, but most of the actual operations is actually not that tough. So the actual sweet spot, according to Ivan, and these are slides from Ivan, is this red curve here. It's like not a huge expertise, but you are an expert in one area, and you have some generalist ability too. And that actually covers the sweet spot of what actually most jobs are. So what people have done is they've taken this, and there's an idea called a T-shaped expert. You are a generalist, so flip that red curve upside down and turn it into a T. You have some general skills, and you have a part of expertise. Your T-shape, your T might be virtualization, right? There's a problem with that. And that goes back to this 50-year problem we talked about, right? So you want to be around for 50 years. So if you're an expert in virtualization of vSphere 3, how long are you going to be around? If 10 years ago, if you were the Symmetrics expert, right? More power to you. I hope you're billing good rates, but you're not going to be around. Unless you last long enough that you're the last one left. So the COBOL people doing very well right now, right? So, if you can sit around and be the last remaining person with expertise on Windows 98 and a Symmetrics or a vSphere 3, you can have a job in 20 years. You'll be doing, you'll be the only one in 20 years. So one of my ideas is, well, let's not be a T-shaped expert, let's be a pie-shaped expert. We always have to, that goes back to we always have to be learning, you always have to be having a learning stance. We talked about all this, and this pie must move over time. So you actually have to be some sort of caterpillar, but then I thought that was stretching the metaphor way too far, and then it was going to look gross. We were going to have a caterpillar with a bunch of legs. So, but you always have to be a pie-shaped expert. You always have to have the thing that your gig is, usually this is the thing the gig pays you for, and then you always have to have something that you're actually working on that's actually interesting. So that's one of those tricks, is always be looking for a new leg to your pie. So let's talk about what some of these are 5 things. So I figured I couldn't do a whole kind of keynote talk here at a VMUG and not talk about technology. I mean, I can talk about this stuff all day, but it gets kind of dry. You guys are a bunch of technologists, so let's talk about technology for a second. So this is a graph of the storage market projected from 2012 out to 2025 and beyond from my friends at Wikibon. And in this graph, they look at what they call server SAN. Terrible name, server SAN. So what is server SAN? It's moving the disks onto the server. So it's not a SAN, but call it convergence. The blurring of storage and compute. You see this in hyperconverged. I think they'd call that, you see this at like the Googles and Facebooks of the world. I think that would be the green track there. You see this in the blue track, which would be everything from a Nutanix, SimpliVity, vSAN, that sort of thing. That's what we're talking about. So look at this. This is they're serious. Gartner and IDC have other numbers that are similar to this. So 2015, we are mostly traditional enterprise storage, right? The same SANs we've been buying. They predict that by 2025, 10 years from now, everything that we're buying is that little tiny bit of red there. What is that, 10%? And all the storage that you're going to be buying in 10 years is completely different. So what does that mean to you, right? How are you going to be adapting to, so if you're in 2015, you're going to make a good living as a SAN guy or a NAS guy. In 2025, you're going to have to adapt. So we're trying to figure out what's this next leg of our pyramid going to be? What's this next leg of our pie going to be? There's this convergence, and I picked 5. I think actually I only picked 4. I think that's a mistake. So 4 areas. We're going to go from kind of least disruptive to most disruptive, I think. This actually, I think, is the least disruptive change I want to talk about today. Convergence and divergence in architectures. Storage, networking, security, all these silos are being merged. If you're a storage person in 10 years, you're not going to have a gig because storage is going to be separate. Or if it is going to be separate, it's going to be next generation storage that configures itself, right? So you're going to have a completely different set of business problems that you need to solve. We're also having the architecture of the x86 box that's then connected to storage somewhere is also completely changing because we're having things like the new NVMe, right? We have memory, we have solid state, SSDs have already shaken up the whole thing, and now we're going to have solid state storage that acts like memory, that's addressed as fast as memory, right? And if you look at what EMC is doing with the DSSD stuff, and if you look at what Intel is doing with the new memory that they have coming out, things are about to get really freaky, right? So you have storage moving closer and closer to the CPU. You also have, if you go over to Intel and look at their rack scale architectures, you have it also the machine, the x86 machine exploding into a rack size, right? So you have racks of aggregated compute and networking and storage with some top of rack switches. So basically you've taken a PC and you've blown it apart across the whole rack. So you have both hyper consolidation and kind of hyper dispersion going on at the same time. Your grandfather's x86 box is not going to be the same. So what does that mean for you? So if you were interested in using this as the leg of your pie, you would start to investigate this, right? I think in 2015, most of us still buy new storage, right? The next time you are buying new storage, so one strategy you could use, the next time you're buying new storage is you should look at some of these vendors, right? You should be looking at vSAN. You should be, the neat thing about this is it goes all the way from the low to the high, right? For very small businesses, a company like Scale Computing makes boxes, hyper-converged boxes that look very interesting. There's SimpliVity, there's vSAN, there's Nutanix, there's Pivot3, there's a whole bunch of them. And at the high end, HP has stuff. And at the high end, it gets freakier and freakier. So one strategy, like, how can I develop new expertise, would be become your shop's expert on the next set of hyper-converged offerings, right? And you will then have a new skill set, and you will have a new set of knowledge. So that's one way of going about it. What was I going to say about this? It's very interesting. The hyper-converged market is very interesting because in some ways we think it's all like SimpliVity and Nutanix, but there's also very interesting stuff coming about. Like even Coho now is running data services and containers on their storage. They're not going to do generalized compute on their storage, but they're going to run data services like compression and dedupe in containers on their storage, or Hadoop data analysis right on their storage. So there's some very interesting things coming down. The next thing I want to talk about is cloud. If cloud was on your bingo card, you do get to drink now, so everybody should drink. I think there's been a lot of confusion about cloud that has gone on for the past 10 years. So, I mean, at the basis, we can talk about cloud from a number of different directions. But for you guys, I think, again, if your basic competency is you're going to start to look into cloud structures, automation is a big piece of it. Scott Lowe, book author, VMware person, now over in the NSX group, he listed 5 different skills. I would list some different skills in this, but his 5 were that he thought were the basis of cloud engineering skills: software development basics and APIs, Linux, automation and orchestration, and then public cloud services. But it's a general place to start. I think the difference between public cloud and private cloud and the arguments that are going on about that is hiding the truth that's happening, which is that we are being asked, I mean, it's a cliche, but we are being asked to do more with less, right? We have fewer admins per compute resource. And we do that through automation. Anything you do that can be done by a robot is going to be done by a robot, right? So you need to be able to learn how to automate this stuff. It's now 2015. There are a number of different cloud platforms. AWS is 10 times bigger than all its competitors combined, right? So there's definitely something going on there. Is it going to eat the world? If you talk to some people, they say it's already eaten the world. I think the reality of the actual on-the-ground world of the places you work at, it probably hasn't, and I don't think it's going to. I think any one black or white opinion of how the world ends is probably wrong. Microsoft has been doing very interesting things, embracing Linux, embracing containers in the Azure cloud. Google Cloud Platform, also interesting. Its main uptake right now, from what I can tell, is over in data sciences and big data. You know, Google still doesn't really get the enterprise so much, but also doing a very interesting thing. The OpenStack cloud world is also growing, right? If you need a bespoke private cloud and you have the development chunks, OpenStack is there. There are many people who will help provide it to you. And VRA, I would include that too. It is definitely an automation and cloud platform. But so if this is going to be one of your legs of your stool here, you know, you would go on and start to learn automation and PowerShell or Puppet or some things like or Ansible, things like that. But here's a question. So this 2015, we're a bunch of VMware admins in this room. How many people in here have spun up an instance in AWS? Okay, that's not bad. That's at least a third of the room. Because I've been in rooms of VMware people where no one raised their hand. And you're like, this is now, I think it started in 2006, AWS, right? So we're approaching 10 years of AWS. It's the simplest thing in the GD world, right? It's the simplest thing in the damn world to spin up an instance in AWS. It costs you about 50 cents. So go do it. It'll cost you about 3 cents to spin it up, but you know, to run it for a while costs you, you know, a few pennies. Try it. If you have it, if you can look at me in the eye and say, oh yeah, I'm interested in cloud, I'm knowledgeable, I know all this stuff, but I really don't think it's going to go there for, and you haven't actually spun up an instance in AWS to tell me actually what the experience is like, you should do it because you might be surprised. Do I think you should immediately move all your mission critical apps to AWS? Of course not, right? I have a friend that runs some data analysis software, you know, in 2015 for pharmaceutical companies in AWS, and their scripts, it's a bunch of Perl scripts and stuff, right? But their scripts basically have to start up twice the number of instances that they need to do the job because half of them fail, right? They either become responsive or their network isn't good enough, or there's still some problems like that. So, you know, the app has to know about the limitations of the AWS infrastructure. Of course, they tried to do the same thing with vCloud Director, and it didn't work because they were trying to spin up too many instances at once, and so we had to go back and throttle the instant starting connection. So your app has to be appropriate to the cloud platform. So anyway, so let's go ahead and this is a famous picture, and it just works so well. So Joe had it, I have it here too. The third piece I want to talk about is DevOps. DevOps is tough because the originators of DevOps have explicitly stated they don't want to define it, right? In part, this is a reaction to previous generations, Agile, Scrum, things like that. They were so recipe-driven, they were so rigid that basically you could make a joke and say that most of the Scrum Agile world is either consultants or other people telling they're doing it wrong, right? And no work was actually getting done. So explicitly, DevOps is saying, the DevOps community has said we cannot be defined. I think that's a little self-indulgent because, I mean, if you can't define who they are, how am I supposed to talk about them? But that's the way they've done it. So there are several definitions of DevOps, and let's go through a couple of them. I was talking to a guy at Pivotal, and he was like, DevOps is very simple, John. If you're not doing development, you're not doing DevOps. DevOps is about producing software. And I'm like, okay, that's reasonable, but I don't think that's a complete definition. So let's see, in this room, how many people in this room, how many of your IT organizations develop software? Okay. Actually, half, maybe half to 60%, which is interesting. But that means that 40% of us basically use off-the-shelf software, or we use SaaS applications, or we use stuff from Microsoft, whatever. We don't actually have developers in the room. So my question is, then are the processes, the principles of DevOps, and the processes and the performance impact that you can do with these process approaches, which, are they relevant to that 40% of people who aren't developing software? And that's unclear, and we'll get to that in a second. If you are developing software, DevOps methodologies, basically it's all about time to value, right? It's about how can we get to where we're going faster. And if you're not doing it yet, I mean, this is something that's very hard for you as an individual to start, but it's definitely something you can start as a greenfield operation in your organization. Or go to some DevOps days. We'll talk about that in a sec. But what I've seen, the difference of, I mean, I've been there my whole career. When you start a project, whether I've been involved in it or have been the consumer of it, right? It's a year-long process, and we start on it. We work on it for a year. About 9-10 months into it, we realize we're not quite going to make our date, so we start a war room, right? And you all go into our war room, and now we meet in our war room every day, and we've got charts and graphs and things up on the wall, and we're going to make our 12-month date. And then right as we go to that 12 months, then for the weekend, we all come into the war room, we shut everything down, and we launch the new infrastructure, right? And if it works, we're all heroes, and we've gone on to another year cycle. Yay, new software. If it crashes, we have to roll it back, and we all get fired. Right? That's pretty much the IT development cycle, the traditional one. DevOps says, well, what happens if we reduce that cycle? Right? What happens if we are releasing every month or every week or every day or multiple times a day? And we have incremental changes. The risk of all those changes is very low. The ability to roll back is very easy. And we have metrics and monitoring on all of them, so we know exactly what's happening. And the new software organizations, the Silicon Valley software organizations that are developing this, are having huge success with it. There's amazing things they can go out. A lot of shit is broken half the time, but it works. It does work in terms of time to value. Major organizations, there's a really good set of videos, DevOps Enterprise Summit, Gene Kim put on. He's put the second one on this year, a lot of videos online. Definitely check them out. Major organizations, IT organizations, old school organizations, retail, aerospace, manufacturing, things like that, are actually using DevOps capabilities to greatly accelerate their development and implementation of stuff. So check that out. It's not just for the hippie kids, so check it out. But there's another version of DevOps, which is about value chain mapping. It's applying the principles of lean manufacturing to IT in general. And that has nothing to do with development. That has to do with processes and implementing processes and knowing where your bottlenecks are. So everybody loves, the Phoenix Project I can't recommend more. It's a little bit, it's kind of workplace pornography, a little bit, because you read it. Now, how many people have read the Phoenix Project? Okay, again, third of the room. It's a short book, check it out, it's fun. I call it pornography because it's like, oh, look at my manager. I wish I had that manager. That manager he gets it. And so they solve their workplace problems and they sew it all up, and it's very much an idealized picture of solving problems in the workplace. But it's definitely worth a good read. And then there's a third piece of DevOps, which is about culture, automation, management, and sharing, where they've tried to kind of roll it up and define it. So DevOps is also a cultural aspect. DevOps is not a job title. DevOps is not a position. You don't hire a DevOps, and DevOps there shouldn't be a position, but it should be a culture. So if you're interested in that, that's definitely an area where you should be looking at. Docker is another, Docker and containers are another place that's very hot right now. There is a new application stack that's growing. I just pulled something off from CoreOS guys. They're looking at clusters and cluster consensus and cluster monitoring and cluster orchestration and containers. They're looking at a whole new application stack. Well, what does that have to do with the infrastructure? Well, not a whole lot yet. But it's important to know that greenfield apps are being built that are cloud native. You'd never want to put your old legacy apps in the cloud, but all these new apps definitely are very, they're capable of being put in the cloud. There's currently a war going on that's interesting for you to know about, there's two wars going on. One is high versus low app platform. What I call high versus low. I don't think anybody else has called this. But somebody like Cloud Foundry has built a complete application platform from Pivotal, right? Very interesting. It's huge. They even refer to it jokingly as the Death Star, right? It's a big application platform. It is the BEA WebLogic of 2015, right? And so it's big, but it's complete. They have all the services that you need to roll this kind of thing out. Folks at Docker and CoreOS and the whole ecosystem of startups that are starting around Docker, I think of it more as Lego, right? They have the container format, they have the monitoring, they have some logging, they have some CI/CD services, and they're kind of putting them all together piecemeal. Eventually, they're going to have to build all the services that Cloud Foundry already has, but in some ways it's simpler because it's more decomposable. With Cloud Foundry, you kind of take the whole thing. So these are two different approaches to running a new app. I was talking to a friend over who's doing a monitoring company, and I was asking, who are you monitoring? And he's like, new stack versus old stack. He said, new stack. And I said, well, then who are you monitoring? Are you monitoring like complete platform like Cloud Foundry or OpenShift from Red Hat? Or are you more Legos and pieces? And he was like, well, actually what we're seeing is Legos and pieces. So the developers like to start, of course, the developers like to start, they never like to, they always want to build it from scratch. So it looks like the developers are favoring the Lego approach, and that's why one of the reasons Docker is so interesting right now for all the developers. But eventually they're going to get some big, hairy mess of a platform that is going to have to be supported by you. There's another war going on. Do you build it for a single cloud or do you build a multi-cloud platform? If you're building it on Docker, if you're building it on Cloud Foundry, you're building a multi-cloud, you're building the ability to move it from cloud to cloud. If you're building it on AWS, you're going to be locked. I don't want to use the word locked in, but if you're going to use AWS, the services you're built in there. So what is it? You're an infrastructure person. Why I was just talking about developers and developers and apps for the last 5 minutes. So what the hell do I mean? Again, if one of the legs of this pie, of this stool, is going to be new greenfield apps, this is super disruptive. You're going to have to learn how this is going to affect operations. How do you keep a Cassandra cluster up and running? How do you monitor a Redis cluster? How do you know what's going on? How do you, how would you monitor and remediate when something goes wrong with Cloud Foundry? So this is another thing that you could be looking at. So these are kind of just 4 areas that you might be looking at that are going to be disruptive and are going to change on a decade-long basis, right? Not just what's the new version of vSphere, what's the new version of VRA, but things that you might be investigating, for the next 10 or 20 years. So, how are you going to do this? Well, one is side projects. I always think that everyone, you're in this business to be learning. Jeffrey Snover, to finish that anecdote, was asked by I asked him, okay, this is a lot of new learning for Windows people. Do they all like it? And he said, no, but by being in this industry, you are in an industry where you have to learn continuously. There are many industries, there are many jobs where you don't have to learn a thing, right? Like construction, right? Go be, it's a fine job, it's a good trade, you get fit, you be in better shape than we are. Go build houses for a living, right? You do not have to learn something new every year. If you are in IT, you are going to have to learn something new every year. So side projects are a great way of doing it. Everything is free. Like cloud, mobile, social, open source has changed. The internet has changed everything. Another book that I really like is called The New Kingmakers by Stephen O'Grady. It's basically a story of how developers now run the world. But you can when you see that, you can squint and say, okay, all technologists, including IT people, run the world. But the basic point is open source, internet, free trials, SaaS, has made it easier and easier to download something, get a trial, most of it's free, you can spin it up in a weekend, compared to 10, 20 years ago to get and even still, right, if I really wanted to get some old IBM product, I'd probably have to go, have a steak dinner with somebody and, talk to them, and then they might send some consultants over, and then after a couple months it would be installed, and, it's a much different adoption process. So side projects, I highly recommend. And the other piece is then to gather your team. So this is what I do for a living, is I help people gather their teams. Some of those teams are mentors, right? You should really be looking at your bosses and people in your organization and people in your community that you admire and who can help you. And other people are the communities like this. I was talking with Scott Lowe a few weeks ago at VMworld, actually, and Scott is an accomplished author. He wrote Mastering vSphere, which one? 3, 4, 5, 6? 3. 3 and 4 maybe, and now it's been taken over by some other folks. But Scott was a book author. He's written many books. You would think he is, he's a guy you admire, right? He's a guy who's accomplished a whole lot in his career. And I asked him, what would you do differently in your career? What would you do differently? And he said, you know what? I'd reach out to people more and reach out to people earlier. Because everybody was there waiting to help me, and I didn't know it, right? And I had to do it all on my own. In retrospect, if I just would have reached out more, I would have gone faster. So, VMUG, great first start, right? Dean, first VMUG. Hi, Dean. I talked to him. He's just experiencing his VMUG for the first time. I have some surveys here in a second, but I've seen people consistently, people who engage with the community, their careers are advanced. And you might say to yourself, another thing that's growing is meetup.com. There's a huge number of meetups all over the world. And you might say, and I was thinking, well, I wonder what's going to happen. I went ahead and, because I was a little worried, we're right here in the middle of the country. I'm like, well, I know there's a lot of cool meetups going on in London, right? But are there meetups going on all over? And I went and I just went to meetup.com and I searched for meetups near Coventry. And this is what I got. And you can't read them, but there's Devops, Ansible, Docker, AWS, data scientists, the Birmingham Cassandra users, Birmingham functional programmers meetup, and on and on and on. Part-time entrepreneurs, Tech Hub in Chattanooga, Leicester Lean startups. So this was just going by geography, right? There are meetups, Midlands Internet Entrepreneurs Meetup. There are meetups all over the country. There are meetups all over the world. So there are people right in your backyard that you can get together with, and they can help you. So I said over and over again, I've seen people who are involved in the community increase their careers. This is a survey done by the V Brown Bag community. People know V Brown Bags, right? If you go to VMUGs, you should know. Not that many people. The V Brown Bags do webinars every week, and mostly on VMware topics. So they started because Cody Bunch wanted to study for his VCAP, right? And he didn't have any friends to study with. So they started this online study session. There's now a VMware meet. I think there's 3 or 4 across the world in different time zones. They're all recorded. They go on different topics, on different themes. I don't know what they're on right now. Great organization. So they did a all volunteers, all us, right? It's just us. They did a survey. And what benefit have you received from the community, right? And I'm trying to figure out how many people have written books. If 5% of the people there said that they've written a book, what their survey size was. Maybe 20, maybe, I hope it was more than 20. But the highest people, but look at that, but 60 to 65, 70% of the people improved job performance and great network and made friends. 40% of the people said, help me with my VMware certification, right? So you can see that increased job performance, huge impact for being part of this community. And then they looked at people who've changed jobs. If you're in your current job, have you gotten a raise? So 50% of the people, no benefit. So I'm sorry about that. But 50% of the people have gotten a promotion or raise that they attribute to being part of the community. And for the 50% of the people that did change jobs, they're making between 5% and 25% more. So being part of the community, engaging with the community, makes you smarter, makes you better at your job, gives you future proofing for the 50 years of your career. This is just a grab bag of other stuff, and then I'll let us go on to the prizes. I think that IT has an operator problem. We've been trained, especially old IT, to be operators. Give me the instruction, give me the spec, I will implement it. Tell me what to do. When the red light goes on, I'll hit the button, right? That's what we've been trained to do. We're actually engineers, and we're actually creators. So the faster you can shift from an operator mentality to a creator mentality, the more successful you will be. I think our jobs can also wear us down. So the more that you can do things that charge you up, more things you can do these side projects, the more things that you can do outside your normal job realm to build that second leg of your pie, the better off you're going to be. Stephen Foskett was giving a similar talk at the Chicago VMUG this year. And Stephen is a good marketer, and what I've done in many words, he boiled down to two, which is look up, right? You're at your keyboard typing. You're at your weekly status meeting. You're at your normal job, 9 to 5. That's not the way to learn. That's the way to sustain. I mean, that's the way to do your job, right? That's the way to get done what's on your list, what's in your quarterly goals. But that's not the way to succeed, and that's not the way to grow. You have to look up from your job and to see what your business is doing, to actually figure out what's going on. I actually just did a podcast. If you go over to TechReckoning.com, I did a podcast where we talked about this with Stephen. And his point is, how do you pick the next technology to search? I mean, I listed these 4 big areas. But how do you fix the next technology to pick? Well, it's things that charge you up, and it's things that as you look up from your job, you realize are going to be important. But you have to be able to pull yourself out of the day-to-day of your task list. This goes from operator to creator. Be a collaborator and communicator. Actually, if you listen more than you talk, you seem smarter. So at this point, I've been talking for 40 minutes, so I don't know what you guys think of me. But seriously, if you listen and nod your head, people will think you're smarter. That's one trick. And the other thing is if you say yes, and this is a trick from improv, IT puts a no in innovation. If instead you say yes and, hey, I want to put all my crap in the cloud. I want to let's move all of our mission critical apps to AWS, your CIO comes with you. Instead of saying, that's crazy, no, you say yes, and I think we should probably work on a bridging plan to get there. And we should do a risk mitigation plan, before we go there. You seem like less of an asshole. Dom Delfino is a VP of SEs at VMware, and during a podcast with him, a Geek Whispers podcast that I do, I'm not quite sure this is an exact quote, but we were basically talking about how do you get your dream job. And we haven't really talked about job roles much here. I've mostly been talking about skills development. But his basic point, and I think it's so true, and I've heard this from many people, in fact, I've heard it from so many people I hesitated to attribute it to Dom, because Dom is actually, if you've met him, he has kind of a big head, and he likes to think that he's invented a lot of stuff. I love Dom, by the way. But Dom and many people have said, to get the job you want, kick ass at the job you have, right? If you want a promotion to a better job, if you want that bigger role in your organization, or if you want a better role in a different organization, you better do the job right in front of you, right? Or nobody's going to give you that chance, right? Over and over again, as I've interviewed people, as I've watched people grow in their careers, it's about the passion for the thing right in front of you, some of which includes actual hard work, right? But it's the passion for the thing right in front of you that gets the people to where they are. And then after 10 or 20 years, they're like, well, geez, I don't really know how I got here. It's like, well, yeah, I guess I did work really hard, and I tried new things, and I learned new things, and I was passionate about what I did, but it wasn't the plan. So that's why, going back to architecture, I'm not sure you can architect a 50-year career, right? I'm not sure where you're going to be in the next 20 years. But I do know that if you excel at what you're doing right now, and you take a learning stance, and maybe some of these things, I hope some of these concepts, or at least maybe triggered something in you today. None of them are super profound. They're all sitting there right in front of you. But those are the people who I've interviewed who are super high performing and have ended up in great jobs. So Gandhi once said this: if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. We need not wait to see what others do. This is what Gandhi actually said. It's actually too many words. Not Gandhi said, so we tend to simply, be the change you wish to see in the world is the way we understand it. Gandhi never said that, but he said something like it. So, I think you have to go out there and be the change that is going to change your IT department, is going to change the way that the business looks at IT, is going to change the way that innovation is seen in your organization. I'm John Troyer, just a little bit about me, let's finish up. I was at VMware for many years. I'm now at TechReckoning.com. You can go over there. We talk about enterprise IT and stuff and just different things. Hopefully some jokes. There's a newsletter. There's a podcast. There's some things over there at TechReckoning. I also do the Geek Whisperers podcast where we talk about geek lives and careers, which also you might find interesting, which is where a lot of the lessons today came from. And so now I think I put us just almost back on time, and it's time for the presentation. So thank you very much for having me here.